Hello, this video is going to discuss women, more specifically married wives, mistresses and concubines among the caliphs of the Umayyad, Abbasid and Fatimid dynasties. That is to say, the three big early caliphal dynasties. And I intend to start by introducing some terms regarding the women that were associated with the caliphs of these dynasties. There were three terms or types of women that were included in the harem, or the special quarters for the women. First you have the term zawja, plural zawjat, which means wife, and there could be up to 4 wives for a caliph, as 4 wives is the limit of the number of wives a Muslim man can have. The marriages and these wives were often connected to forming political alliances between the caliph and various other powerful clans and groups. Then you have Jaariya, plural jawari, which are slave concubines taken from various places, and there is no limit on the number of slave concubines that could be owned by the caliph, or by any other Muslim man for that matter. The third and last term is Jiha, plural jihat, which means flank, but should more accurately be translated as side mistress, which were mistresses to the caliphs and could be considered something of non-official wives. They could also be considered something of unofficial, sometimes voluntary slave girls, if the 4 wife positions were already taken, and they should be considered unofficial, sometimes lovers, or rather prospective wives, but not officially recognized as such, as these side mistresses had no official status as belonging to the caliph, and thus offered a bit of plausible deniability on the part of the caliph that could hold it as a potential point of shame by more or less claiming that this girl got pregnant by another man and thus proved herself to be loose, rather than accepting any child produced as his own legitimate child. As an advantage to the jihat or side mistresses was that the caliph was not necessarily forced to accept the children as legitimate, and thus allow other families to get a claim to that child or their mother, or a position of power relative to that child and mother, and thus to the caliph himself. But if he wanted to make his child from a Jiha mistress legitimate, then he had to declare that the Jiha had always been married to him, or make her declared as a slave girl to him, though this last alternative was rare, thus making her officially part of his women, the women that are Islamically legitimate to have children with, to have sexual intercourse with, and thus children, according to the interpretations of the Sharia, the divine law of God, of which the caliph is supposed to be the implementer of on earth, as the jihat are the unofficial women associated with the caliph, and as the expected goals of the women in the harem was to produce heirs for the caliph. This could only happen with legal children from either married free women or from slaves belonging to the caliph, as there existed a sort of legal equality between children born from slaves and married women in the harem, in terms of being considered legitimate children of the father, and thus possible heirs to the throne. And the children of Jiha mistresses, the nature of only being part of the harem unofficially, could sometimes be rejected or accepted, and thus their mother also got accepted as either a wife or as a slave girl into the harem. These were the 3 types of women associated with the caliphal harem in various ways, and I should now go into more detail about the various dynasties and how they practiced these various types of relationships to the women in regards to having legitimate heirs and forming political alliances and relationships. And we will begin with the Umayyad clan, which ironically bears a name that comes from little slave girl, Umayyi from the little slave girl, but actually in the beginning of their caliphal dynasty actually avoided to have heirs from slave girls, and instead they had a preference for marriage, and heirs being from said marriages, and these marriages were almost always of Arabic origin, as the Umayyads had a view of other non-Arabic bloodlines being impure, and thus never intermarried with them in the beginning. In fact, Marwan II, one of the caliphs of the Umayyad dynasty, was disparaged for being born of a slave woman, especially by a Kurdish slave woman, as he was thought of as being impure due to this Kurdish heritage. And the marriage away of daughters within the Umayyad Caliphal clan was also reserved only for either the clan itself, marrying off the daughters to other branches of the Umayyad clan, or to other Arab clans. The Umayyads still were the Caliphal clan that married the most outside of its own family though, even if it was only limited to other Arab families and groups. Marriages for the Umayyads were very much a part of their political strategy, to marry other strong Arabic groups in order to ensure support for their dynasty. Yet in the beginning these marriages were more or less only limited to Arab families. Later, and especially after the Umayyads lost control of most of their territories during the Abbasid revolution, they did marry away to powerful Berber clans and non-Arabic families. And you also see more slave concubines producing heirs and being the mothers of heirs, and marriages outside the clan, both to the clan and of also marrying away the daughters of the Umayyads. You have, for example, the Umayyad ruler Abdurrahman I, who was born of a Berber slave girl mother called Raha, and he himself married Halal, a daughter of an important Berber clan. So the later Umayyads practiced marriage within the clan but also outside the clan to non-Arab men of high status and of important positions later in their history. The Umayyads were the clan that married the most with the outside and also produced the most heirs from marriage, even if they initially only married with other Arab groups. Now compare these to the Abbasids, that began doing marriages within the clan but also outside to both non-Arabs and to Arabic families. You, for example, have the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, who married Zubaydah, his cousin, to bring certain factions within the Abbasid clan closer to him, which was a marriage within the clan. But you also have al-Mu'tadid, who married the daughter of Humarawai, his governor of Egypt, whose father had been rebellious and created the Tulunid dynasty as a way to improve relations and to form an alliance and reintegrate the Tulunids into the Abbasid sphere of influence. And these people were originally Turkic slave soldiers that rebelled and became an independent political entity. Though the Abbasids initially were very open to marriages, later major official marriages became a lot rarer among the Abbasids, and the last major marriage that was official, besides Mu'tadid's marriage with Humaraway's daughter, was Al-Mamun to Buran, the daughter to one of his chief political advisors. Al-Mamun himself was born of a Khorsani concubine with the name Marajil, and in the late 9th century there was almost no marriages, and almost all of the Abbasid caliphs were born from concubines. And the Abbasids were avoiding marriages in order to avoid getting bound to anyone, in order to avoid obligations to other clans and groups by creating marriages. So they did the opposite of the Umayyads that tried to marry with a lot of clans and groups in order to get a net of alliances. They tried to avoid marriages in order to not be dragged into various feuds and power games between families. And similar strategies would be used by later Islamic dynasties such as the Ottomans, that would also avoid to marry outside of their family and to prefer slave concubines as being the producers of heirs to the throne. And official Abbasid marriages would more or less only come back in a limited fashion in the 10th century and afterwards, and that was marriages of Abbasid daughters, not into the Abbasid family, but marriages of daughters from the Abbasid family to various local rulers in order to placate them and secure at least some power, as the Abbasids after the 10th century had become more or less figureheads dependent upon others more than actual political actors with independent power. And they were reliant upon securing the good grace of various factions. As for the Fatimids, who claim descent from Fatima, you would think that this would put a greater emphasis on keeping the bloodline purely Arabic, and the women of Arab descent, similarly to the Umayyads. But no, the Fatimids almost only had Jiha and concubines from faraway places and often non-Arabic groups, such as various Berber clans. And the only exceptions to this were at least 3 of the Fatimid caliphs, that is Ubayd al-Mahdi, al-Mu'izz, and al-Hakim were all married within the Fatimid clan, within the various branches of the Fatimid clan, taking wives that were actually at the beginning Jiha mistresses, but acknowledged quietly as wives later. And those are some of the few cases where they actually did marry to not faraway groups. In any case, there was no big official marriages to the Fatimids in any case, but many marriages of Fatimid women away from the Fatimids to various groups, often groups far away here too. The family strategy was only having marriage relationships to far away groups by marrying away their daughters, combined with only producing heirs from concubines and Jiha mistresses that might be considered either concubines or wives, or not legitimate women at all, entirely by the discretion of the caliph, with no official marriage obligations attached to it, and thus no official political obligations attached to it, unlike marriages to the main Fatimid ruling family in a direct official way with official marriage obligations that are stated before an heir is produced, rather than afterwards, and thus just becomes a marriage with the most bare bones of obligations that has to be accepted, as the unofficial Jiha mistress would accept that, as it was better for the mistress and for her family that she was married in the barest sense, rather than being ashamed due to having produced an illegitimate child. And similar as what happened with the Abbasids and their later use of only Jawari slave concubines to produce heirs, the use of Jawari slave concubines and jihad mistresses meant no political claim through an official marriage with official obligations could be used to hold over the main line of the Fatimids, as the Jiha system allowed the Fatimids to set the terms and obligations regarding the marriage contracts to their family. But by marrying away their own daughters, they could get alliances from far away, where they were far away enough to not really be a threat to the Fatimids, but at least close enough that the Fatimids could actually use them. And people sending women as jihads or mistresses to the Fatimids also meant that the Fatimids got a lever of control over these people, as they could decide if these women, these mistresses, would be considered legitimate wives, or if when they produced a child, if they would be thrown out and the families would be shamed due to having had a daughter that produced an illegitimate child out of wedlock. Jihad mistresses were used by both the Abbasids and the later Umayyads, but not to the same extent as among the Fatimids, who used the Jiha system extensively as a tool of power and control, in comparison to more regular power building through official marriages to their family. And this was a short overview about wives, slave concubines and mistresses in the Umayyad, Abbasid and Fatimid Caliphates. I'm open for any comments and questions. Please post them and give me a like too.
Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities.
اشتركوا بالقناة من فضلكم.